Hey folks, welcome back to the DarkHorse Podcast, live stream number 83, Q&A session with all kinds of madness.
Mm-hmm. Yep, cute madness.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of,
Yeah, it's cute. All right, we have so many amazing questions this time, even more so than usual. I already feel bad about all the great questions we won't get through, so let's just do it. The cats are in the sink.
I just snapped ineffectively. There you go.
Yeah,
better.
Okay. Is there any... I'm good. Okay. We start with 3 questions from last time, go to our Discord question, and then jump into some of the many questions from this time that are so good. Is there any benefit to being raised by biological parents as opposed to adoptive, genetically unrelated parents?
Yeah, you want to... I'm ready.
You go first.
Okay. In one way, a simple yes. The simple yes is that the pattern is, especially in households in which you have a mixed brood between adopted and genetic children, there is a difference in things like injuries, abuse, all sorts of things. So that's probably reflective of a deeper pattern. And so, yes, that is not to say, though, that adoption doesn't work perfectly well. Especially in circumstances that foster its functioning. So it's not an absolute answer, but yes, statistically speaking, that bias exists.
Yeah, I guess I would. There's a lot to say here. What you said is true. Anecdotally, I grew up in a family of that description, in which I was the genetic child of my parents and my brother. The 4 of us lived together and we're always, my brother and I were always told we looked like brother and sister, but he was adopted and I was not. The research evidence is a match for my anecdotal evidence that even though there were all attempts made to treat us completely equally, it just didn't happen. And that has been observed across situations. That said, entirely genetic brood families and entirely non-genetic brood families might well not have differences between them. And I haven't seen the research there, but I would predict that parents who are loving, who have 1 or 2 or 3 kids, none of whom are their genetic kin, would likely not suffer, in those families would not be in any way compromised by the fact that those children were not their genetic kin.
Yeah,
precisely because as one of the main premises of our book, which I guess we'll talk about whenever our next live stream is, because it's in chapter 1, is that we are so much more software than hardware. Humans are. We have, at the point that we are born, there is so much yet to be decided and discovered about who each of us is going to be, that part of us that is determined by our genetics is just far less important, relatively speaking, in a human than it is even in a chimp or a wolf, and certainly than in a sponge or a cedar tree.
Mm-hmm. It's also the case that adoption is probably wired into our software, at the very least, in a very ancient way.
Absolutely.
Because there would have been lots of adoption of relatives on loss of a parent or something like that.
Yeah, and there's adoption in other species as well, other primate species. Yeah, not stranger adoption.
Right. Stranger adoption is novel, but the point, if the software is there, it can be co-opted. And it is also the case that when a family adopts, they're making a very deliberate choice. Mm-hmm. And so, there is the possibility.
You don't happen into adopting a child.
Right. You don't adopt a child by accident.
Yeah. And so you might therefore predict that such families would be more loving, more able to be fully present with their children, etc. Yeah. How much credence should be placed in Geert Vanden Bosch's objection to ivermectin as a prophylactic? This is again a question from last week. And I don't remember enough about, it's a long time ago. It's not that long ago, but it feels like a long time ago that you had the conversation with
There have been a lot of bad arguments since.
Yeah. And I don't know if he still feels the same way he did, nor do I know exactly what
Right. I don't
said.
remember, actually. So I can't answer that. But I should know. And I wanted to check back in with him anyway. Yeah. This is an interesting moment. So I will do that.
Is it?
Well, it's certainly an interesting moment.
I'm
with
kidding.
respect to
It's a
his
very interesting
hypothesis.
moment.
Yeah.
Yes, true. What is your take on the political platform at kneel4democraticpresident.com? That is, I'm plugging a platform I've worked on the last 3 or 4 years that I think is right up your alley and you might find interesting. So I asked you while I was sorting all of these to take a quick look over the break.
I looked at it, and so
this is Neil, number 4 Democrat.
Kneel4democraticpresident.com.
Mm-hmm.
So forgive me, Neil, if that is in fact your name. I hope I will not butcher, in having just briefly perused your site, your intent. But it seems to me that what he has done is kind of create a placeholder where he's going to kind of run for the office that he doesn't want and doesn't intend to take in order to hand it off to somebody who might be more suited to the job, because he's not particularly ego-driven, and he lays out some useful tools for thinking about political stuff and problem solving and things like that. And so I think he's a very dangerous person.
Oh, really?
Very dangerous. Yes.
I haven't seen it, but I can see on your face that I should be concerned.
Well, I'm sort of speaking for the powers that be, right? Because,
cool.
Somebody like that who's just kind of trying to do the right thing because somebody needs to do it.
How dare he?
Yeah. Well, I mean, geez, if everybody started acting like that, then
where would we be then?
Right. I mean, how would they distribute their garbage narratives? And
how would we sell them shit?
How would we sell them shit and make them do things and cow them into submission and all of the other stuff? So
why do we cow people into submission rather than sheeping them into submission?
Yeah, or bull them into submission.
No.
I mean,
why do we cow them and not sheep them? We talk
two
about people
different
being
levels
sheep.
Of question. No, because it's the action. So that's why you would bull them, because the bull could maneuver you into a quadrant of the pasture you didn't want to be in.
Why don't we wolf them into submission?
Because we're too busy wolfing them down. I don't know. I don't make this stuff up. I just respond to it.
Fair enough. Okay, from the Discord this week, there were 2 questions, and we're going with the second one. Why do bees keep putting up with us stealing their shit? What do they gain from being kept by us? Are we in a mutually beneficial relationship with bees, or have we just enslaved them?
Oh, you so totally nailed it right there, like one statement before the last statement.
They always do.
Yeah, they always do.
Yeah. The Discord they.
The Discord they.
Yeah.
Like all of the other critters that you want to feel terrible for because you think it's like a wild animal that you've plucked out of its life and inflicted death on, we are in a partner relationship that is spectacularly good for all of the creatures that we have long partnered with. I would not make this argument at all for the poor creatures who are captured for exotic foods or something like this.
And in fact, you make a strong argument against just that in your Unheard piece.
Yep, it is there, and I strongly believe this, that as much as I don't think this had anything to do with the bushmeat trade or the exotic animal trade.
Other pandemics have.
Well, almost certainly one.
HIV.
Yeah. But these things are barbaric in their own right, these trades, and they do put us at greater danger than the other kinds of contact that you might have with wild creatures. But anyway,
beekeeping, not so much.
Beekeeping is good for bees.
Well, it's an interesting moment to be asking this, right? Like, there's another part of human enterprise that is destroying bees, which we all know, right? Like, and it's not universally agreed upon what is happening to the bees, but it almost certainly, at least one big piece of the puzzle is the insecticides, things like and glyphosate.
Mm-hmm.
So that has nothing to do with beekeepers, though.
Right. So the point is the ancient relationship with bees, or the semi-ancient relationship with bees.
Well, the Hadza, they don't keep bees, do they? The Hadza eat honey, but they smoke them out and. Yeah. They steal honey, but they don't have a relationship with bees.
Right.
Yeah.
But the raising of bees is certainly positive for bees. And in fact, in North America, our bees are Asian imports, which is certainly good for them. We transported them across a gap. We humans transported them across a gap they could not have covered. So anyway, there's lots positive from the bees' perspective. You could say the same thing for chickens, sheep, goats, cows, everything else. But the point is, nothing says this is permanently a great relationship, and things get very different when you start factory farming and things like that. So what I would say is there is a healthy relationship. We shouldn't feel bad about having given these creatures such a great deal, but we actually have, there's a contract, a moral contract between us and the creatures that we house, and we damn well better live up to it.
Yeah. All right, on to questions from this week. Dear HMB, could you please do a systematic analysis or series of pods or video for each cited piece of ivermectin evidence in the FLCCC's review PDF? We need your rational, articulate analysis in a form that can be circulated and discussed worldwide. Thank you. I don't know. So this was one of the top monetary value questions, which occasionally I won't read them because they're just obnoxious, and this wasn't obnoxious. I don't know if we'll do that. We've done some things very systematically and carefully, and there's a lot of moving things right now, and I'm not sure, but I appreciate hearing the request.
Yeah, I would say directly there's a cost benefit analysis. What is the best use of our time? And I will say it's not,
I would love for someone else to be doing that. Sort of like, I always wanted great textbooks.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of reasons that I didn't use textbooks. One of them is that I don't like handing people pre-digested pap.
Yep.
But there was literally one book, aside from lab manuals when I was teaching comparative anatomy, that was nominally a textbook that I would ever consider giving to students, and that was Pianka's Evolutionary Ecology.
Yep.
Terrific book. Most textbooks are garbage, and it's a really tough job. It's a giant target, it's a moving target, the research is changing all the time. But I always hoped for some other people who were great at what they were doing to really want to do that job. And this is the sort of thing that it's sort of more in my skill set than yours-ish, but I also don't think it's my highest and best use.
No, it's not. And, I think, hey, look, we've won on lab leak, at least the first layer.
Yeah. Well, this is an ivermectin request.
I know, but my point is lab leak actually describes the proper way that this works. There was a division of labor in the fight over the lab leak. Yeah. And the people who were excellent at that other thing did it. And in this case, we've got a bit of a different situation because you especially, I think you and I together are very good at analyzing these things, and you're very good at sorting the detail of exactly, methodologically what happened, for example. But, but God damn, there's a lot of failure. And we could become ivermectin all the time, and we could justify it because it's a very, because lives are at stake, but it's not the only place. And so,
well, and it's different. The story isn't as technically complicated, right? Because it's not a question of an evolution and a potentially enhancing of evolution and, and all the bits of the virus and how it's interacting with the body and the various systems in the body and all of that, which is just an amazing sort of scientific and detective story with regard to what is the origin story of SARS-CoV-2. Whereas ivermectin is a story which is emerging from clinicians and from countries. And so, you're left with having to, just receive data that you hope are good and then assess how those data are analyzed. And, when I used to teach statistics, I was very careful to teach the simplest possible because I hated the idea of people having spent all this time observing a pattern, generating hypotheses, creating experimental design, collecting the data, and then shoving that into some black box of a statistical analysis that they had no control over, and that then spit them out a number, and they're like, I guess the computer says yes or computer says no. So I don't know. I don't trust, and I don't know how to assess, nor do I believe that most of the people who claim to know how to assess fully the very complicated statistical analyses that are being done for the most part with these sort of meta-analyses actually know what they're doing. And I don't claim to know. I can get a few levels in, but I can't go all the way to baseline with these analyses.
All right. I now know what I think the answer to this question is.
Okay.
It makes no sense to do this. And the reason it makes no sense to do this is that there's probably a ton to be said about the quality of those studies, about their defects, about the implication for their results. But the evidence is so far beyond what is necessary to apply a safe drug to an ongoing pandemic that the point is you don't need that. You're asking for precision when you've got enough accuracy to tell you to go. Right?
Yeah. No, and I think that's why I just like cleaned up the slides and like, we're going to show these slides. Yep. Like we're going to just show these, and it rests on the idea that the data are what the data claim to be.
Yeah.
But other than that, there's nothing, you come to your own conclusions. Look at, those slides that we showed in the first hour today, simply have, if the data are what the data are claiming to be, here's case counts, here's fatality counts before and after the introduction of ivermectin widespread across 5 different countries, and in one of those countries across 4 different states. And you can look at what happened in states that did have ivermectin and what happened in a state that didn't.
Yeah.
And come to your own conclusions, I guess. But I don't know how to look at those graphs. I don't actually. I would like to hear what the people who are saying there's no evidence, where are your CRTs, what they say in response to those. We're not claiming that those are hypothesis tests,
right?
But they, one after another, and clinicians saying, you know what, I'm just doing it.
Well, wait a second. They are hypothesis tests. They are not hypothesis tests in the classic sense. But the fact is, every new country or every new province that applies ivermectin to a wave of COVID is a test of the hypothesis that ivermectin effectively treats COVID patients and prevents new infections, period.
Yeah. Okay. So, the first time anyone does it on their own, not having seen data from elsewhere, it's an observation, and it's a bunch of convergences. But presumably, at least let's just take the most obvious example within India, unless all of those, whatever they're called, chief ministers, did it on the same day simultaneously, they, began to look and went like, oh, actually, I'm going to do what that guy did.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. Good. Canada has announced that for those who received the first dose of the AstraZeneca vaccine, the second dose can be either the AstraZeneca or the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine. Have you any thoughts on the logic to this? P.S. Thank you both for keeping us sane last year. I think we talked about this.
We did.
Yeah.
I think
last Q&A.
The short answer is you would love to know what the combinatorics are, but basically there's nothing wrong with the logic that says this should work. But what we do know is that the expectations of how these vaccines work do not match what actually happens in the body.
Well, in both cases, so AstraZeneca is DNA, right?
Yep.
So AstraZeneca and J&J are DNA, and Pfizer, Moderna, mRNA, but they're both using the spike protein. They're both, basically coding for the spike protein that is then supposed to stick on the outside of your cells that your body is then supposed to recognize and then become immune to COVID should you run into it. And so if that was all as clean as it sounds like, it should work. But the problem is that the spike protein doesn't seem to be sticking to the cells, and it's circulating widely, and spike protein itself is a toxic menace.
Yeah. So the basic point is the vaccines do not work the way the brochure that describes them says they should. Yeah. It's possible that they do in some people and don't in others, but it is clear that there is an awful lot of leakage of spike protein that is supposed to stick in the cell surface. And in light of that, are you better off with 2 different, there might be slightly different failure modes of the different vaccines, maybe, but I think...
so maybe it's actually better, but, those trials certainly haven't been done.
Right.
Yeah.
You can draw your own conclusions, but there's nothing fundamentally wrong with the idea of mixing between the vaccines, because the whole point is you're informing your immune system with spike protein, and a different mechanism that gets you there could be positive, it could be negative. It's probably not wildly different, but it could be. That's a possibility too.
Yep. What is your opinion of insect repellent fabrics such as Insect Guard, which uses permethrin? Are they effective and safe? If not, how would you recommend navigating insect-dense areas in the tropics? These are terrible for insects. They're simply terrible for insects, and they make your experience of walking around the jungle, for instance, somewhat more comfortable, but you're killing insects. And what we saw when we were there last, when we were in the Amazon last in January of 2020, was I mean, still plenty of mosquitoes to bite you, but many, many fewer insects, and many, many fewer insectivorous birds. And this wasn't just our observation. There are the data to support these observations that we, these anecdotes, these anecdotal observations that we made on the ground. We then found, in fact, one of the people was actually there.
Yep.
Who's been doing the bird surveys over the last several decades. And he said, yep, they're plummeting, especially the insectivorous birds, because the insects are plummeting. And, why all? Is it people's insecticide-laden pants primarily? No, but it's not helping.
Yeah, I mean, I think these things probably aren't healthy for you. Yeah. I always wonder, the stuff that is supposed to repel insects seems to be awfully toxic. How much is the repelling based on the fact that, the creatures have a detection for something toxic? Anyway, I never mess with insect repellent.
Yeah. Right? I remember back in the day, I think it was still a film camera, back when I was shooting with some beautiful Canon SLR. And it was early enough in doing field work that I did have DEET with me, and I had applied it and been careful. And God, if you ever touch that stuff, just don't touch anything else. Like, so you'll kill amphibians almost on contact. But I thought I'd clean myself off, and I went to hold the camera, and I left a DEET impregnated fingerprint that had melted the plastic on the back of my Canon camera body, and I was like, "That's it. I am through." Yeah,
but the other thing, I mean, haven't been a fan of DEET since I was a
and permethrin is chrysanthemum based. Like this is it's a botanical.
It's better. It's a botanical. It's certainly the way to go if you're going to do it. And there is something to be said for something that you're not wearing, right? Pyrethrum candle downwind of you, for example. There's also something to be said for understanding how the mosquitoes find you, that they're basically following CO2 plumes, and that you can therefore, if you create a CO2 plume, it's liable to be followed by mosquitoes. It is certainly worth saying that if you're...
breathing does that.
Yeah, but breathing in one place, airflow, all those things.
I'm just you could have been taken to be suggesting that just cease your CO2 plume and you're safe.
There are some people I wouldn't mind seeing them cease their CO2 plume, but nonetheless, first of all, you gotta say, if you're fearing the tropics, because as bad as things are mosquito-wise here in the temperate zone, they've got to be worse in the tropics. This is just not true. The absolute worst places are places I've been in. Worst mosquito I ever saw were in Maine, right? I know that Montana, Alaska, I've heard.
Yeah, but I mean, for those of you who aren't as attractive to the mosquitoes as those of us who are, it certainly can be bad, especially if you're doing like animal behavior, which requires that you actually just sit still and keep your CO2 plume where it is.
Right.
And, I did, for instance, as you know, I began carrying mosquito coils, like lit mosquito coils, and I was sort of like circling them around my head to keep them away. And I, once set myself on fire because I was actually watching the frogs. And
you know what you need?
Yes.
A diving bell.
I need a diving bell.
All right. You don't need a diving bell, but okay. Mosquitoes are bad in the temperate zone. They're different bad in the tropics.
Yeah.
There are often ways of managing them that people who have to deal with them know, and learning their tricks is much better than importing some technological fix.
But don't set yourself on fire.
Yeah, indeed.
Luckily, I was in the jungle, so it didn't spread.
Right.
I just smoldered a bit. Left a hole in my quick dry pants. Okay. Next question. What do you two evolutionary biologists think about the possibility of life in our solar system beyond Earth? What about Europa or the moons around Saturn? Bret, you get extra points if you can add a dad joke into your response.
Oh, I mean, the performance anxiety in this question is through the roof.
I shouldn't have read that last part,
but
then you wouldn't have known about the extra points. So,
actually, I think I get points for the performance anxiety thing.
Yeah. No. Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Fair.
Sure. Yeah. How many points? This is lefty but not liberal. No. Sorry, lefty but not loony. Nice. Very good.
Cool.
I doubt it. I think there is certainly life elsewhere in the galaxy, even, and I hope for conscious life elsewhere in the galaxy, even. But in the solar system, I doubt it. I don't think so.
Yeah, there's something.
I don't feel like absolutely no way, no how, but I doubt it.
Yeah, my instinct is the preconditions for life are the question that if you get the right preconditions, the cascade of selective events that then results in adaptation.
And our idea of Goldilocks zone is very human centric. So moons of Saturn.
Yeah, but it's pretty freaking chilly out there.
It is, but Goldilocks zone is our biases.
Yeah, but I'm not even talking about that. I'm just talking about the
lack of energy.
The lack of energy and how dynamic a system it creates, and whether that results in the kind of selection that is necessary to get you all the way to adaptation. I'd love it. I'm not expecting anything super cool on the moon on Europa or
it's gonna be mat-like. Or floating like.
Right.
Yeah, planktonic.
Ooze-like.
Ooze or matter.
But I mean, how cool would it be to, see a little ooze that didn't come from here, right?
I think that would be great.
You and I both do.
Yes. It's part of why we're together.
Yes.
Yes.
Get excited about,
ooze that didn't come from here.
What would you call it? It's a properly exotic ooze.
Yes, properly exotic. Ooze that wouldn't recognize high tea if it hit in its face.
If it even has a face. Most
it probably doesn't. Ooze, no, it doesn't tend to.
No.
Okay, this is I think it's one question, but it's in 3 parts here. You've said that school's primary defect was that it didn't fit normal human motivational structures, and that school should be self-rewarding, such that you were not driven to succeed to please others. I was raised in a family and culture, and it's a female name asking the question. I was raised in a female culture where excellence in school was the golden ticket out of financial hardship. Growing up, there was no demonstrated interest whatsoever in the actual workings of the subject of study. 5 years post-graduation, I have a bio-sci degree from the top college in my country. I find myself depressed, apathetic, and unmotivated, resentful and fearful of learning and making mistakes. Any advice on how I could stop being a cog in a job I hate and work toward acquiring knowledge and skills that I'm interested in and fulfilled by? It's tragic.
It is tragic, but I also think that there's hope for you, because what you need is to find the question, the venue, whatever it is, where your search can lead you to something important enough that you will understand it to be a very good thing to have found it. And even just the fact of searching for it will cause there to be a hunger. Yeah. And so anyway, my point is really about foothills, right? That the key for figuring out how to retool yourself is finding the event that constitutes your first taste of that other thing that you want to accomplish, and that you can learn from, that allows you, that was pretty good. That was cool. That was a small eureka moment, but I liked it, right? And then the point is, well, okay, if that's how you get to that one, what else would I be interested in? Maybe bigger game, right? Yeah.
Well, and that's, it probably feels like it's too late, but it's not. I mean, and frankly, you wouldn't be asking this question here if you really, really thought it was too late. And at some level, it's never too late. I do think that much of the world and much of science and many scientists teach science. You say you have a bio-sci degree, as if it's the textbook. It's rote learning, it's rote memorization, it's feeding back lists of facts. It's, if you have a bullet point list, then you have the thing. And that's really the antithesis of science, right? That's like the conclusions of science that we think are true at one time, and hopefully we're mostly accurate, but it's not what science actually is. And so trying to remember maybe where you have been interested in, where there have been little glimmers of like, I wonder what, I wonder if, I wonder why, in the arena where you are working, start to pursue those and, find the foothills, as Bret says, and move from there.
Yeah. I'm reminded of what students' first reaction when you take them into a tropical forest often is, right? Where, our experience is, there are questions all over, right? You walk through the forest and most of the questions are little, right? But they're there, and they shout themselves at you if you know how to listen. But until you know how to listen, it just looks like a sea of green.
Well, this is something I actually wrote into my first book, right? That this was exactly my concern when our first professor walked us into the forest in Costa Rica. And he sort of opened up his arm. He said, "Look at all of the questions." I was like, all I see is green. Like, right. I don't see any questions at all.
Right. Yeah. But if let's say that it took you 2 weeks, right? And you're walking and you don't see a single question. You see some cool stuff, but you can't figure it out. If it took you 2 weeks to get to your first question, which your first question,
that's not very long.
It's not very long, and your first question is the key to understanding. You get a search image, so-called, for such things. And so to the extent that you've found one, and the point is, oh, well, all right, I know how I found that. And then you find a bunch more like it, and then you find a few that aren't like it, and the next thing you know, they're all over the place. So something like that. Good luck.
Yeah. We have 3 just wonderful comments here. All send money to these good, honest thinking people. Critical thinkers support our own economy to feed those willing to consider ideas against the priests and Pharisees of our time masquerading as scientists. Thank you. That's awesome.
Thank you.
And thank you, Heather and Bret, for being guiding lights in a time of darkness, sanity in a time of insanity, curiosity in a time of absolutes, free thinkers in a time of forced compliance of thought. I just bought the book on Audible. Awesome. And thank you, Heather. Thank you, Bret. Much appreciation from Somerset, England. You are the highlight of my week. Wow. And then this. Did you know that Amazon lists Dianetics as a related product to your book? Also, Heather, please allow Bret to make more dad jokes. The painful jokes outweigh the pain from working out. No, I did not know that Amazon lists Dianetics as a related product. And what the hell are they doing?
Yeah, what is that?
I don't know.
Oh.
It's beginning.
It's
maybe
beginning.
Right. Okay. Oh,
Dianetics.
I know. That's L. Ron Hubbard, right?
Yeah.
Hey. It's not a cult. It's evolution. For God's sake.
You're talking about our thing.
Our thing.
Yeah.
Yes. All of this. Functional medics suggest that fasting could be a reset for gut health. Hypothesis extends to autoimmune disorders. Hormone and insulin suppression is key. Have you seen any research that feels evolutionarily likely? So I'm not sure exactly what that final, evolutionarily likely exactly means, but we've talked here. I'm not sure we talk actually much in the book in our food chapter about intermittent fasting, but we have talked here before and elsewhere about both the physiological evidence for it being a great way to reset gut health and basically decrease inflammation, which seems to be one of the key factors in so much illness among so many moderns. But then another completely different line of evidence for its value is how many different cultural traditions use some form of intermittent fasting. Right. So, at the moment, I'm only coming up with one, which is, Ramadan for Muslims. But there are many peoples and traditions across time and space that have used IMF, intermittent fasting, in some form. And that suggests right there that there is some value to it.
Yes. It is also the case that whether one chooses to do it or not, an ancestor would very likely have faced it enforced by the environment and its uneven rate at which it coughs up things to eat. So anyway, yes, there is an argument to be made for the fact that, your system's built for it.
And, I usually don't like the metaphor of like a cleansing, but I think there's some accuracy there here if you don't take it too far, that, getting yourself gut empty on, at least in a sporadic basis, if not a regular basis, will help make sure that, stuff doesn't build up.
Yeah. And
it's not perfect, but I think it's okay.
By analogy too, there's lots of things that we now know require sleep to function, immunological things, for example. And the point is that cycling rather than always being sort of doing something.
Yeah.
Right?
And sleep comes easier. Sleep is better. Sleep is deeper. Sleep is more healing. Obviously not if you're starving.
Yeah.
But if it's been something like more than 4 hours since you've eaten, right?
Yep.
If you're actually, that's, certainly if you've got alcohol in your system recently, it feels easy to fall asleep, but you're really just passing out, even if you've only had a couple of drinks. Like it's not sleep that you're falling into really, and it's a disturbed sleep.
It's disturbed.
And I say that, we drink it. I say that not as a teetotaler.
Messes up your dreams, your sleep cycles too.
Very
and so
so.
all sorts of processing. So I guess that's the point, is that there is some sort of ancestral pattern of, you don't always have, your ancestors didn't have a refrigerator, right? Up until very recently. your very recent ancestors had a refrigerator. The ones just slightly farther back had an icebox, and then pretty much nothing. Maybe they had a cave.
You don't know my ancestors.
I'm not the boss of your ancestors. Let's put it
That's
that. But in any case, there would have been an awful lot of inadvertent fasting.
Yes.
Right?
Hey, let's call it intermittent and pretend we were trying to do that. Let's be cats about this.
Right, we'll call it intermittent and then we can sell it.
But it is built into a lot of, fasting and then feasting.
Sure.
It is built into a lot of cultural traditions as well.
Well, I guess the thing, so confession, I don't really know what they mean by intermittent fasting, because it seems to me like if it's not intermittent, it's famine. Is that wrong?
I think what they mean is periodic. So regularly, like it's either circadian or
periodic.
I don't know what the fancy word for weekly is, but so it's like it's on a schedule, I think.
Right. Okay.
Intermittent.
Intermittent is not. It's not a good description. But in any case,
Oh, can they hear what you're saying, Zach? Not really. You can have to repeat it. Okay, so you could. So Zack, our producer, who is currently not speaking into a mic, says, think of the intermittent setting on windshield wipers. Zack, who drives now, and well, too. He drives well.
And apparently knows how to use his windshield
wipers. And knows how to, well, he does live in the Pacific Northwest, so that's not that surprising. But he points out that it's like the intermittent setting on windshield wipers, which is just the medium thing. And I guess both of those uses of intermittent are not generally what I think of when I think intermittent.
No, I think of the maddening phenomenon when something is wrong with your vehicle, but the problem is intermittent. So
and you take it in, and you're like, I know it's not happening now.
Right,
but
exactly.
Yes.
So I'm not sure any of this is all that helpful. I think periodic fasting would be a much better description. But anyway, because that's an ancient phenomenon that would have been enforced by nature, if nothing else, a lot of things may sort of expect it to be. And to the extent that you disrupt it with the refrigerator phenomenon, you don't know how many cascading effects there'll be.
Absolutely. I just picked up my ivermectin to implement as a prophylactic. I understand that your family has chosen that mode as well. What dose do you recommend? Incidentally, my doctor refused to prescribe me ivermectin and suggested either, I think there's a word missing here, either of T, to which I said no. I think it's probably either of the vaccines, maybe. I'm not sure. The doc that prescribed it, the doc that did prescribe it told me to take one a week for 3 weeks. Thoughts, will I be protected? So go onto the FLCCC website and look for the Mask Plus protocol.
But I will say, so I have to say this. We are not doctors. We are scientists. We are not in a position to give you medical advice. We can tell you something about how we look at things, and you can take it as you will. But the thing that I would say is the data, and I was especially struck by the fact that there are apparently very strongly measurable effects in populations that use ivermectin for preventing parasites, preventing and treating parasites.
Yep.
And that those usages, the prophylactic use, is much rarer than the prophylactic dose that one would extrapolate from the FLCCC documents. So here's the question. It seems that this drug is very, very safe. So there may be, no drug is perfectly safe. All drugs have impacts on your liver. And
I don't want to be on anything for the rest of my life.
Right. My assumption is that, hopefully we get a handle on
herd
COVID.
Immunity,
we're talking about
tanks.
months to a couple of years. And anyway.
Hope it's not that long.
I do too. But, a couple of years seems likely to be safe. But here's the question. What we are not finding out, because we are busy pretending that there is no evidence that this works, is we are not finding out. Okay, one of the studies, the Argentina study, showed 100% effectiveness. Not a huge study, but it was 800.
Well, let's just be careful.
Yeah.
So it was 800-ish. It was like 790 something. So call it 800 who were given the ivermectin protocol and 400 who were not. Of those 800, some considerable fraction, I don't know what the number is, some considerable fraction actually exactly followed the protocol. Of that considerable fraction of the 800 who perfectly followed the protocol, there was 100% efficacy. But there were some people in that 800, again, I don't know the percentage, who didn't totally follow the protocol, and they were not completely covered from COVID.
But
So
presumably,
just to be careful about reporting out the results.
Perfectly accurate and precise if possible. Presumably, a category that says a binary category did or didn't follow the protocol. Did follow the protocol means one thing and one thing only. Didn't follow the protocol can mean anything. Anything except the one thing. So what that means is there could be people who didn't take any in that group. So if we limit the analysis to those who followed the protocol, we see something like 100% protection. Now, I'm not claiming that pattern would continue if you got a much larger data set. It might not, don't know. But
there's no a priori reason to think it wouldn't.
Well, right. And the point would be this. If you are always, how do I put it? 100% protection suggests that the dose is too high. Right? What you really want, because assuming that the dose was not chosen for some reason that reached 100%, and probably we don't know what dose reaches 100% because you need a lot of study to figure out exactly what that dose is. The point is it's probably a guess. And so if a guess reaches 100%, then what you want to do is say, how much in excess is that guess of the necessary thing? And you want to back it off until you get to the number where 100% is just barely maintained.
And this is actually related to an important point that we should probably make on the main podcast at some point, which is that, and actually this is something I found when I first started looking into ivermectin, whatever that was, 3 weeks ago now, which was one of the first things you run into is, but the dose needed to treat is 100 times the toxic level, the recommended level, and it's guaranteed to be toxic, and therefore you can't use it. And what that number is based on is some animal model trial in which they just chose an amount. They just chose a dosage and found indeed that it was protective, but they weren't saying that's the dosage that you need. They were just saying, well, this is the first one we tried and it worked. And so what you then do is you titrate isn't the right word, but you basically back it off in successive trials, which is effectively what we've had done in like Slovakia and Czech Republic and Panama and Mexico and India and all these other countries now.
I don't think it was an animal trial. I think it was a tissue trial.
Oh, yes. No, you're right. It was in vitro. Yes.
So even worse, because really it's completely misinformative, because really, I'm not saying that the experiment was bad, but what it was in the early days, of COVID, right? You have a disease. You don't know what might work, right? You don't want to, give some,
anti-Helminth drug.
You don't want to give such a weak dose of a drug that something useful shows no effect. So you err in the direction of let's just see what works.
Especially in vitro, like you're not even harming lab animals, which you shouldn't want to harm. But in vitro, you're doing no harm.
This is a quick and dirty survey to see what molecules show promise and are worth studying. So to take that as if it's an idiot, these people think that dose is tolerable to people? No, nobody said that. What they're doing is they're just looking for what molecules work. So anyway.
That's good. On a related note, what's up with hissing? Cats hiss, geese hiss, my ex-girlfriends hiss. Why is that a common warning? Also, you shouldn't be wearing hats like those without a bolo tie. This is Al Quinn again. He always wants you in a bolo tie. Not me, though. I'm not wearing a bolo tie, but neither are you.
True. I mean,
I don't think my hat requires a bolo tie.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, my hat, which is now still a very weird color for me because my red hat got destroyed in the boat accident.
Right.
That was the death of the red hat. Anyway.
And near the death of you, but
yes. I lost a
treasured hat.
No people, but a hat.
Yep.
And a bunch of other stuff. But okay, what's up with hissing? Apparently Al's ex-girlfriends hiss, and cats hiss, and geese hiss, and other things
How could this person, Al, I assume Al's a guy, how could Al have missed cockroaches?
Yeah, in Madagascar, the cockroaches hiss.
Yeah. I'll just take a wild guess. I think this is going to start with some creature, and this is like aposematic, but it's sound. So aposematic is when a creature is colorful or has a pattern on it that alerts you that it shouldn't be messed with because it wouldn't have such a bold pattern if it was tasty, for example. So in any case, if you imagine that there are, if there are snakes that hiss, and there are.
Well, I was just going to say, I think I know where you're going. This is like aposematic for the sound a snake makes as it tastes the air. Right?
Well, I don't know. I was imagining.
You think they're actually actively hissing as opposed to that's the two-pronged
Right.
tongue out that then goes into the vomeronasal organ. And,
Sure, but is there a sound? I haven't noticed the sound, but
you don't get close enough to snakes, man.
Small ones, so the sound maybe is not that profound. I have never heard a sound from a snake tasting the air and doing the vomeronasal thing, but I do think that there are some snakes that hiss. But I may be responding to a myth. Yeah. I was hoping that you'd know as the herpetologist of the two of us.
Yeah. I don't know.
Well, you know what? We're going to find out really soon, right? People are going to contact us. But if, in fact, there is some frightening creature that hisses.
I mean, I guess I was saying I think snakes do hiss, but I don't think it's a particular subset of snakes, but I'm not sure about that. It's not that it never occurred to me if snakes hiss. Like, yes, snakes.
Snakes hiss. Yeah. All right. Well, if snakes hiss, then it's probably an allusion to that. And in fact, we can come up with another example. Mm-hmm. You're probably going to know which snake. And there's more than one. But there's at least one snake that is not a rattler, but uses dry leaves and wiggles its tail to create a rattle-like sound.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, someone that's sympatric with rattlesnakes, but of course rattlesnakes got a big, broad range.
Yep.
Yeah, I can't think. I mean, it may even be just, also garter snakes are also ubiquitous, big, broad range. They may do it. But it might more likely be someone who's also visually aposematic.
Yeah.
Copying rattlesnakes.
Yep.
I think that is a known behavior, and I can't think of who it is.
I'm sure it's a known behavior.
But tell us.
I've read about it and I've heard it, but I can't remember what snake.
I could go get my big book of snakes. It's a good one. Next time.
All right.
We didn't really. Yeah, we did. We're good. Congratulations to Zack on making it to Rocketry Championships. Your son is literally a rocket scientist and the unsung hero of the DarkHorse Podcast. Yes, he is. Yeah, he's awesome.
I'm sorry. I have to correct you. We sing to him sometimes when he refuses to get out of bed in the morning. He doesn't like it, which is why it works.
So he's been sung. He's not the unsung hero.
Not unsung.
He's the sung hero.
He's the sung hero of the DarkHorse Podcast.
I think even though, it's not his favorite moment to be sung to, if we picked a different song, he'd probably appreciate it more.
A song that wasn't appalling?
Yeah, he says any other song. We picked the worst song we could think of and also remember the lyrics too.
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe we'll just leave it at that and let people guess. I think we will. And maybe we'll tell you next time.
And it is not It's Raining Men. That might be a close second.
What advice would you give a 46-year-old wanting to learn more about math? I am a right-brained thinker who never grasped anything beyond the basics. Thank you, Allison. I mean, it depends on what kind of math you're talking about. Something like Khan Academy is really, really great, actually. And they have better and worse arenas, but it's pretty great. I guess I would want to know what kind of math you're interested in. The Twitter account run by our friend. It's called Great Women of Mathematics, GWO Maths, is terrific. And you pick up math here and there. And it also does sort of, history of math stuff, but it's also got actual math.
Yes, and it is open to you no matter what you were identified as at birth. Sorry. All right, I have now interrupted your flow.
Oh, go for it. What do you have to say about math?
I was going to add one thing. I don't have anything really useful to offer on how do you get into math. I would say the thing I experienced was whether or not you had a teacher who loved the subject and understood it deeply made all the difference. Math was incredibly painful when the teacher didn't really get it or care.
So that's hard for a 46-year-old, right?
Right. But in that vein, I was going to recommend a particular mathematical thing that I thought was super cool and actually points you to a teacher that I would recommend. Vi Hart, who is on YouTube, has a number of videos that are...
How's that spelled?
V-I, I think H-A-R-T. Anyway, Vi Hart has one video I would suggest you start with, which is on the Fibonacci sequence in nature. And I think it's pretty marvelous.
This is Vi Hart?
Yep, that's Vi Hart.
So Zach, you can show this briefly. Okay.
Anyway,
that's
her
cool.
thing is a cool channel, and the Fibonacci sequence in nature thing is especially good because I think we've talked about it once before actually, but you if you look around in plants and you see all the Fibonacci sequences, you think, my God, what's going on here? Are the plants better at math than we thought? And in fact, something else entirely is going on. And those are Fibonacci sequences, but they got there a different way, and they're there for a really good reason.
That's super cool.
So anyway, we can maybe return to that some other time, but it's cool stuff.
And I guess I would say, again, this won't be helpful because it's about the particular situation that I had growing up. My father's a mathematician, and he instilled in me such a deep love of math because it was everywhere, and we were always playing at math. And he had actually, when I announced that I was going to become a biologist, he was like, "Why biology? It's the least interesting science." And I think before he died, we managed to compel him.
I think we had
that was.
But yeah, it was not his instinct.
It was not his instinct. And so when I was growing up playing in math space all the time, it wasn't about finding Fibonacci sequences in plants. It was much more. It was about practical. It was about engineering. It was about putting up fences and making sure things didn't fall and such, and purely abstract and just like the beauty of the numbers. And for me, that got me there, but I'm not sure that that if you were coming late to it, that you would.
I wish, now that you mention it, given that your dad was not on board with biology at first, that we had been able to have the conversation with him about Mandelbrot. Right. So my investigation of Mandelbrot got cut short by what happened in 2017 at Evergreen. But the insight that drove Mandelbrot to discover what he did,
this is Fractals guy,
was that effectively math, as instantiated at the time, is inadequate to deal with biology, right? That there are processes,
And he's 19th century, or he's
no,
early 20th century?
He's 20th century.
Okay.
And in fact, he...
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, I had him.
He may even still be alive.
Really?
Probably not. But anyway, yeah, he was at, I think, was it Bell Labs? No, he was at IBM, I think. But anyway, he noticed that there were certain mathematical problems that created paradoxes that needed some different kind of mathematics. So, for example, if you have a shoreline and you want to know what the distance along the shore is, the finer and finer you measure, the greater the distance, because you've got all these undulations right down to the molecular level. And so effectively, the finer you measure, if you measure with infinite fineness, you get an infinite shoreline, no matter how short it is. Right. So that's a mathematical paradox. And anyway, he found these things in biology, and he pursued them and figured out how you address these things. And I don't think he invented fractals, but he took a very crude fractal science and advanced it radically. And anyway, I would love to have had the conversation with your dad about here's where biology and math meet. And it meets in a place you won't notice because mathematically we didn't get anywhere near good enough for this to characterize the math that your dad would have studied.
Yep, absolutely. So you were much closer to right here. Mandelbrot was born in 1924 and died in 2010.
2010.
Yeah. Yeah. What time are we at, Zach?
You are at 55 minutes.
Oh, okay. There's just some commenty questions here. Let's get through them quickly and then move into the next hour. This is super cool. Scott Adams gave you high praise in his stream this morning regarding ivermectin, while also offering tips for how scientists in general can gain more credibility with those who lack a scientific background. Please check it out. Cool.
That's great.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah. During questioning about our help to other countries, Biden mentioned ivermectin by name as support that we would be sending. I can't find this clip anywhere on YouTube. Do you have thoughts? Love you guys. So I'm reading that not because I've heard of this at all, but so that it's out. I don't know anything about this, but I'd love to see that.
Yeah.
I'd love to see Biden talking about that. And then, of course, that would raise the questions of why we don't let that happen here. But so I don't know anything about it. Do you see any evidence of any variant posing a greater threat than the base SARS-CoV-2? And do you have thoughts or feelings regarding giveaways and lotteries to incentivize getting the vaccine? I think some of the variants are more highly transmissible. I haven't seen anything about them having higher fatality rates. I've only seen stuff about transmissibility.
Yep.
But there's the data are so crap that I don't know what that means, right?
And
that are being shared with us.
The transmissibility data now exists in the confusing environment in which you've got people vaccinated. So, so the extent to which we are now causing, I would say the thing I fear more than the variants is the diversity.
Yeah.
Right. The diversity of SARS-CoV-2 variants is frightening because it's a harder puzzle to deal with by a lot.
So if I may rephrase, the thing that you fear, that I agree with, the thing that you fear more than any individual variant is the number and array and diversity of variants.
Yeah. And I worry a lot that Geert Vandenbusch might be right about the relationship. I've seen some data that has a scary connection. Now it's possible, there's a lot that's sensitive.
He may be right that mass vaccination during a pandemic can drive new variants. That's the thing that you're
certainly
saying
right about it in principle. In practice, that we could make things far worse. In other words, a scenario in which we come close to, if we were smart and we ivermectined our way there, that'd be one thing. But let's say we got close to vaccinating our way out of the pandemic and it generates a variant so far removed from the modern vaccines that we effectively restart it.
Right.
That is a frightening scenario. So anyway,
it is.
Don't know, but I would say it's the diversity of the variants more than it is any individual one.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about the incentives to?
Oh yeah, I hate this.
Yeah, I do too.
I hate this.
It's for shame, really, for shame.
Right. So, especially in light of the fact that what's really going on here is you've got hesitancy. I'm sure some of the hesitancy is loony, and a lot of the hesitancy is not loony. And for you to incentivize people into ignoring the hazard that they feel, even though you do it because you think you're doing the right thing for planet Earth, you're leading people to ignore a danger that you are not in a position to say does not exist. And that makes you responsible for what happens downstream of that event. I would also point out, and I can't remember who said this to me, somebody in the last day or two, somebody pointed out I will figure out who it was. I haven't talked to that many people. The classist nature of such incentives, right? The wealthier you are, the easier it is to ignore, and the more likely you are to be educated enough to ignore a lottery being used to induce you to face some hazard that you instinctively otherwise would be held back by. And so the extent to which we are going to end up extending the experiment of these vaccines to people who are not as well positioned to resist the carrot that we are delivering, or not as capable of seeing past the unlikeliness that a lottery will smile upon them, right? There's something very, very wrong. And again, the obsession with vaccinating everybody. I would be so on board if these things were clearly safe, or if we had reason to believe the system was excellent at doing that, and that the only thing there was a tiny chance of a long-term harm. But I don't think that's where we are.
Yeah, either. Okay, quickly, two more. What is the reaction to your no medicine ivermectin podcast been like, both privately and publicly?
Overwhelming support. The mechanisms that distribute it have behaved very oddly. I've seen anomalies on the YouTube, whatever it's called, the YouTube Studio app I've never seen before. Things behave strangely. The numbers were going up really, really fast, and then they hit this YouTube molasses phenomenon yesterday, where the rate suddenly plummets to near zero, and the graph of views does not show a discontinuity or a plateau. It's perfectly smooth. So it sort of looks like something behind the scenes wants this not to be visible. But if you're paying attention to the number of people who've seen it, there's something clearly happened. Same thing happens on Twitter. There's been a lot of hostility. a lot of that hostility is garbagey, you don't know it works, prove it, this kind of thing.
Why aren't you talking about how great vaccines are?
Right. Blood on your hands kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the sock puppet thing where there are all of these sock puppet accounts or burner accounts or whatever they are that, if you just simply click through to them, they look so weird. Oh, you've got 16 followers and you signed up in 2009 and you follow 800 people. Like, I don't know what that is, but that's not organic. So there's something that wants the conversation to have a certain sound, and it keeps chiming in and trying to control the conversation. So anyway, it's very confusing. That's the answer to your question.
One last question here, and then we'll move to a few questions from this hour. If Bret is Maverick, does that mean Heather is Iceman? Zack, that's a reference to the movie Top Gun. I trust your parents have educated you sufficiently in this regard. Now, Zack, I don't remember, actually. I know we watched Top Gun with Toby recently, but it's possible you were there? You weren't out doing rocketry at the time? Okay, so I think we've both got a few characteristics of the Maverick character and of the Iceman character.
I totally don't remember these characters well enough to say anything about it, really.
Well, let's see. Maverick is main dude, Tom Cruise.
Yes. So I would say physical resemblance, definitely.
Not for me.
No, for me.
And Iceman is, what's his name? It's I can't remember his name. But,
wait, it's
yes.
Was it Val Kilmer?
Yeah.
Was it Val Kilmer?
I think so. The guy who then plays Jim Morrison.
Right. Totally.
Yeah, that's about all I got. But no, I mean the character. I think Iceman is called that because he keeps it completely cool when he's in the cockpit. He does not make errors there, and Maverick, it runs hotter. And I think there are places, there are domains in our lives where each of those descriptions are a better fit for you and a better fit for me, and it's not all one.
Yep.
All right. Oh my goodness! Look at how many amazing questions. Wow, I really appreciate it, guys, and I'm sorry we won't get through most of them.
It's like a tropical forest.
Yes. All I see are words. I bought 1.87% ivermectin paste for my horse. For homogeneous paste, I could compute the dosage for a 180-pound horse. I know you aren't medics or vets, but are there any unsafe downsides if another species consumed it?
I can only tell you what I've heard and read, which is that it's the same stuff and the animal stuff tastes like apples.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if there was something different in the formulation. That certainly, even if you like crunchy food, you probably don't snack on your cat's kibble, right? Like, they're lesser. Generally, the standards are lower, and there are certainly some things that humans can eat that our animals cannot, and presumably vice versa is true as well. So that is all true,
Yep.
and I don't know, but I think again the FLCCC has some stuff on this.
Well, the FLCCC will help you. They will prescribe ivermectin, and there are other ways to get it. I certainly bought ivermectin. I can't remember exactly how it worked. If there was a pharmacy and it had a doctor and you had a consult, that was at least available. But I don't.
But we have heard from people that the horse stuff tastes like apples.
I think the horse stuff famously.
And those people are still around.
Well, we don't know. We don't know what fraction of them are still around, but those who are still around report that it tastes like apples. Let's put it this way. I sourced human ivermectin because it's preferable. On the other hand, in an emergency, I wouldn't have hesitated. This is me. It's not you.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have hesitated in an emergency because the fact is COVID does damage over time. The later you apply this stuff, the less likely it is to work and the less effective it's going to be. And so time is of the essence and like that. But yeah.
Can we imagine a means for otherwise safe ivermectin to have a long-term risk interacting with COVID? Also, how hard would it be to engineer a serial passage to this effect, either well or ill-intentioned?
Wait. I don't get the last part.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know. Like ivermectin isn't alive, so you can't serial passage ivermectin. It doesn't change as it goes through organisms, right? It is a static medicine. But so the first one, can we imagine a means for otherwise safe ivermectin to have long-term risk interacting with COVID?
Hold on a second. I'm trying. So the landscape that you're looking in is the following thing. You got antibodies and you got receptors that work like antibodies but are on the cell surface, and they're basically a structural set of proteins, and then they have a variable tips, right? They're Y-shaped. You've seen, the diagram we've all seen of antibodies are Ys floating around. Those tips are variable. They're electromagnetically variable. And so they stick to stuff that's unique to them, whereas the rest of the antibody is generic, at least within the category of antibody that it is. But as your immune system develops an affinity for something, if you get vaccinated, let's say the vaccine works exactly as planned.
Mm-hmm.
The spike protein comes to the surface of your cell. The immune system regards it as foreign. It basically sees your cell as infected with virus. It learns the virus signature by contacting the spike protein. There is selection that then produces cells that are better and better at sticking to the spike protein. Okay, that's how it's all supposed to work. The ivermectin binds to the spike protein and so has impacts on that process. And it is also the case that antibodies can create their inverse. The immune system can react to antibodies and it can create the inverse sticky pattern, right? So all sorts of things are possible in this landscape where, if it is true that antibodies pick up the inverse of the spike protein in order to stick to it, then the inverse of an antibody that has the antibody that has the spike protein imprint and the inverse of that antibody is a different antibody now looks like spike protein in some regard.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't think it will look enough like spike protein to matter, right? In other words, it's not going to, stick to ACE2 well enough to disrupt the cell in all likelihood. But is it conceivable that something down that road could happen? In principle, sure. Lots of things are conceivable.
Yes. Well, and I guess maybe my version of this question earlier this week was, are we at risk of ivermectin equivalent of antibiotic resistance?
Right.
Right. It's exactly that analogy. And we sort of concluded probably not, but theoretically, is it completely outside the realm of possibility? It's not completely
outside the realm of possibility, but it's much less likely because ivermectin is non-specific. Right.
I mean, it is. It's insanely nonspecific.
Yes.
It really does seem to be one of less than a handful of wonder drugs with regard to the general nature of things it will bind to and cure you of.
Which I should point out is why I want to see the dosage driven down to the absolute minimum necessary to do the job.
Right, because like antibiotics, we risk driving all sorts of other things that might be our symbionts out with it.
If this is a super sticky, awesome molecule, then the point is actually
as little as possible. Thank you very much.
I'd like as little as possible of that to get the job done. And short term, it matters less than long term, to be sure.
Yep.
But boy, would it be great to stop pretending it didn't work and start figuring out how best to use it.
That's crazy talk.
Probably.
A key phrase as of late seems to be pyramid scheme. Maybe it's a key meme. Which ones do you see collapsing? I hope you enjoy a weekend off, and thanks for the essential lifeboat through these times. It's interesting. I actually haven't seen pyramid scheme come up, but I'm trying to not pay attention to as much of what's just coming across feeds lately.
I want to frame it a little differently.
Okay, go for it.
Pyramid scheme is the only game in town. Why? Because it profits faster than anything else. So what that means is those of us who want to do real stuff in the world and not play the pyramid scheme game are going to lose to those who play the pyramid scheme game and play it well, right? The pyramid scheme game can also be called the bubble game, right?
Mm-hmm.
The financial crisis of 2008 was basically a scheme whereby the particular thing in question was mortgages and mortgage-backed securities and credit default swaps and the other things that allowed the thing to happen. But the basic point was a bubble began to emerge. Those who understood where the bubble was could ride it up and escape before it collapsed, leaving the a huge destruction of wealth and the bill handed to other people, largely us, the public, who had to bail out the institutions in order to restore the world economy. But the basic point is, if you really want to be a billionaire, right, you probably want to get good at the bubble game and get rid of everything else from your mind. Figure out how to just recognize the next bubble, how to understand when to get in, when to get out, that kind of thing. That's going to be the quickest route to the top. And it is not only not productive, it is absolutely destructive, right? We're living in a bubble economy where this is the game. So anyway, my point is, why is pyramid scheme everywhere? Because pyramid schemes are everywhere, to a greater and lesser degree.
Yep.
And the danger that this puts us all in is massive. So it ought to be the highest priority to figure out how to make pyramid schemes not pay. That's the key thing. They have to stop paying, or you're going to see nothing but them from here on.
Yes. Good. Is genetic immunity to COVID possible due to higher innate immunity towards flu, for instance? My dad and I are the only two people we know of on our street who tested negative during India's second wave peak spread. It's interesting.
I will bet you that there is genetic immunity, and probably of a couple of different kinds.
Exactly. That's what would be my guess, based on no data at all, but that would be my guess.
But highly likely that some people are all but immune or completely immune.
Yep.
And then there's a question of whether you could acquire immunity without encounter with COVID, so that you are walking around genetically as if vaccinated from before the pandemic ever began.
Yep. Next question. Someone asked about the rates of vaccination for Indian states. Excuse me. Goa, 39%, Delhi, 35%. TN is Tamil Nadu, 14%, and Uttar Pradesh, 10%. Calculated for 15 states, and the range is 10 to 39%. That's apparently from that same source, ap.covid19india.org, that the data were being gathered from to make those graphs that I showed, using only one dose, so percentage is from 0 to 200. That's interesting. I didn't see the question about asking about rates of vaccination for Indian states, but I was actually thinking, if you would show my screen again, Zach, let me just go back to this one. So this is all 4 of the states that were just mentioned. This is Goa and Uttar Pradesh and Delhi and Tamil Nadu. As I was looking at these, as I was preparing these for today, I was thinking what I really want is these same graphs with vaccination rates overlaid, so that we can see the two obvious things. Does early vaccination slow the spread of cases or fatalities? And does that interface with the widespread distribution of ivermectin?
Yep.
And of course, the question isn't, does widespread vaccination slow the spread or not? The question, unfortunately, is, does widespread vaccination slow the spread, do not much to the spread, or accelerate the spread, perhaps, of new variants?
Yes, and what does it do to the rate of death? Which is another question.
Exactly.
Imagine, though, you remember back in the early days of COVID, when just like right after 9/11, suddenly there was journalism everywhere, and people who had been in the corporate machine and were doing pseudo journalism were suddenly reporting on stuff, and it was wild. And science came to life as COVID was new, and everybody was trying to figure out what was going on.
The preprint servers.
They gave
the Wild
up
West.
on peer review. It was the Wild West, but there was lots of stuff
in
to
a good
talk
way.
about. It was great. Imagine that was going on now. That instead of having settled back into whatever the game is currently, we were excited about the fact that we had various tools at our disposal. It would be freaking great to figure out what their interaction was, which ones were safe, which ones weren't, what the best treatment was from the cost-benefit analysis perspective. People could be furiously at work figuring out, what do we do now collectively, because we're all in this together.
Instead, to continue your analogy, we're all looking for weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
we're looking for
right?
weapons.
I mean, that's it. That like we all bought a story.
Yep.
We're told like a bunch of journalism happened, and they were like, "Oh, this is it. This is where we go." No one look at the man behind the curtain, and
yes, we are looking for weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, while the Chinese are looking for the real killer of OJ's ex-wife.
Chinese.
Well, I'm figuring they're looking for the population of creatures or people in which the virus was circulating before it got to Wuhan.
I see.
And,
Okay.
you know,
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure they are. Okay. Have you heard the idea that there was potential motive for a purposeful lab leak due to Trump's trade deal with China having a force majeure clause? I have not heard that.
nope. So
I haven't heard it.
I haven't heard it. I will
Yeah.
just say, if your thing is intentional, not leak, right? You have a fact you have to deal with. It made no sense if the idea was the Chinese, for example, wanted to have a COVID-19 pandemic. It made no sense to release it in Wuhan. Release it in Yunnan, we probably never would have figured out it was a lab leak, because those few people who figured out there was something weird with the genome would not have had the central fact that called most people's attention to the hazard here, which was this showed up in Wuhan, which makes no sense. So it sounds to me like the hypothesis being advanced here is that it was not the Chinese who released it. It was somebody else trying to quash a deal, which I ain't seen no evidence. But anyway, deal with the fact that if your hypothesis is the Chinese released this to accomplish X, releasing it in Wuhan didn't make any sense, right? You have to at least figure out why they would have done that. And I have yet to see a reason.
Yeah. Okay. We got a lot here. We're probably well over an hour at this point. Several of these are just comments. So I'm just gonna read through a few more, and then at some point we're just gonna have to call it a Saturday.
We're just gonna call it a Saturday.
Call it a Saturday.
Yeah, all right.
In fact, I'll do it now. It's Saturday.
Wow.
Yeah.
I had not caught up to that fact yet, but
thought of talking to Rand about ivermectin. I presume you mean Rand Paul, not the Rand Corporation. Although, boy, if the Rand Corporation were interested, they could make a difference.
yeah, sure.
That could. I assume that if this is about Rand Paul, that Rand Paul has said something. I just don't know. I don't know any of what's going on in politics space on this.
I'd certainly talk to Rand Paul about this. For one thing, I mean, he's been in the right place on gain of function lab leak. He correctly exposed Fauci, who lied to his face. And anyway, so he's been good on this. He's a doctor. I'm trying to remember exactly. Did he say he'd had COVID and therefore wasn't going to get vaccinated?
I don't know.
I think he said that. If I've got it wrong, I'm sorry, but I believe that was the story. And my sense was, yeah, that's exactly the right. Reasonable people can disagree over the wisdom of getting vaccinated in the first place. I think ivermectin actually changes the puzzle so radically that the reasonable person argument begins to disappear. But a person who's had COVID doesn't need the vaccine and doesn't need the risk, whatever that risk may be. So anyway, what I'm saying is I've heard Rand Paul make sense several times.
But it sounds like he's not following the science-ish.
I
got that from what's his what video is that? Who is it? Damn it.
JT.
Okay, I'll look it up.
Yeah.
It's a good one. You keep talking, man.
Anyway, all I was saying was I think Rand Paul is making some sense on this topic, quite a bit of sense, and he's courageous about it. And there's so much on the line here. I wouldn't, under ordinary circumstances, be troubled by crossing the aisle to talk to Rand Paul, but for God's sake, this is an emergency. Like, I'll talk to anybody who is anywhere in a position to help and is capable of hearing the message, and there's no question that Rand Paul is there.
Hey, Zack.
Yeah.
Who made the video that I showed you?
I knew it until you said you didn't know, and now I forgot.
I can't figure it out. I'm
It's
sorry.
not JT something?
Okay, Zach's gonna figure it out because
Okay,
my
Zach's gonna figure it out.
half-assed attempt at searching here are not working. Okay, where are my questions? Here we go. Do you have thoughts on AOC rejecting the $100,000 that Matt Walsh of the Daily Wire raised to help AOC's grandma? So many conservatives are volunteering to help her, yet she and other leftists won't meet us halfway. How can we bridge this divide? Again, I didn't know anything about this. I don't know.
Well,
But,
yeah. Okay. So AOC has been a very destructive force. I think she has played to our sympathies, and it's this kind of weaponized empathy thing, and I'm not a fan. On the other hand, I think that there's this campaign to go after her on the basis that she drives a Tesla, or, that her grandmother's place is, not nice. And I think the point is there are supposed to be rules to this goddamn game, right? And the goddamn game is supposed to involve leaving people's families out of stuff, right? If you've got combatants in the game, you don't go after their families, right? Do you really want to be scrutinized for what car you drive? Do we want to go after AOC and then us all have to account for what car we drive, right? This is insane. This is lunacy. AOC is vulnerable at a policy level. Let us talk about where she is wrong on policy. And if she lies, we should talk about that. But I don't believe we should be talking about what car she drives, and we should be,
I agree we shouldn't be talking about what car she drives. And I actually, I suspect that I agree with her on some policy issues, although I don't know what they are at the moment. I feel like I did see something on Twitter about her grandmother in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
Right. So she brings it in though. So
she did.
Right. So
right.
There's she's too much ego, right? And like politicians have to be ego, else they wouldn't they wouldn't be successful. Right. But I don't think it's a legitimate rhetorical move to bring in the stuff and then say, you can't touch that stuff. That's not nice. Like you brought it in, you brought it to the table.
No, you're right about this. So I guess then my appeal is to both sides.
Right.
Okay?
Like everyone has to up their game, but whichever side goes second loses. I'm sorry, whichever side goes first loses.
Yeah.
If you lay off first, then the other side just gets rocket fuel.
So I guess the point is, I think you're convincing me. Okay, so AOC drags something in to pull on heartstrings.
Right.
It raises an obvious question, and others.
Well, I don't even know if it does. Like, really, all I think I saw is like, here's a picture of my poor grandma's house in Puerto Rico. It's destroyed, something like this, right?
Yep.
And it does pull on heartstrings, but does it raise questions? I don't know if it raises questions. Like she needs to be raising up all of her beloved family members before she can, drive. I don't even know if she drove a Tesla, but before she can, dress the part to do the job that she's trying to do here. Well, no, that's also not how it goes.
So it sounds like I've convinced you and you've convinced me.
No, I think that she's not playing a fair game.
Oh, she's not playing a fair game.
But I think that her antagonists are also not playing a fair game. And Perfect. I think in this case, with regard to the particular thing that is AOC, did she walk onto the stage and start it? Yes. But had it started before she ever walked onto stage in the public eye? Yes.
Yeah.
So there is no, she started it, they all started it.
Yeah.
Like there's no tracking it back to origin. And it's the entire conversation that is broken.
Yep. I'm compelled.
But that's
where
not
have you
good.
landed?
Yeah, exactly. I want a solution.
A solution. Yeah. No, we've got a thoroughly corrupt system is the problem, and basically, it's all symptoms until you figure out how that works. But yeah, look, AOC has extended. She has pushed the envelope with respect to the rules. She has, I believe, manipulated us with tears and all sorts of stuff and stories that are exaggerated. And she's pulled all kinds of shenanigans. So I'm not sympathetic.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I do think somebody has to speak for, the reasonable rules of the game, right? You can't have Andy Ngo getting the crap beaten out of him in the streets of Portland. Frankly, a reporter has the right to go anywhere they goddamn want on any street in any American city that they choose to report on, right? Mm-hmm. Antifa doesn't get a fucking vote. So my point is there are rules, and that's one of them.
Mhm.
And hey, we, grant people a certain amount of leeway, and we don't, nitpick the details of their lives or what they post on social media for any hint of hypocrisy. We actually have to be generous to an extent in this.
Yeah.
And so anyway, that umbrella extends to AOC as it does to everybody else, whether she deserves it or not specifically.
Yeah. Yep. This is just the same person who was asking about if they might have genetic immunity, having been living on a street somewhere in India. They don't specify, where this person and their father, I think, were the only two people who haven't gotten COVID. To put it in context, I've been in the COVID hospital and patients have coughed near me. I was masked. I've lived in the same house with 3 people who tested positive. 2 of those wanted to spread to others after they left my house. I hugged 2 others who tested positive later. I'm not planning to take the AstraZeneca vaccine. My innate immunity seems to be good. I will take ivermectin as precaution. I'm fairly active also, 10 kilometers walking plus 45 minutes boxing daily. Yeah, I think all of that looks like good analysis.
Yeah,
frankly.
good analysis. And, again, I want a huge effort put into figuring out exactly how good ivermectin is, what its limits are, what the minimum amount necessary is. But from what I have seen, I think there's every reason to believe you are better protected with ivermectin than you are with the vaccines.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
So in light of that, given that you seem to have innate immunity, maybe you just got lucky a bunch of times.
Yep.
That's certainly possible. But whether or not you have great innate immunity, ivermectin appears to be highly protective at very, very low risk. And that's probably all you can ask. We don't have anything better. That's
Yep.
what's clear.
Okay. I'm just going to grab a couple more. I'm going to find one more question. Start scrolling down. Grab a couple more comments first. Indiana Weinstein and Heather Croft, I see. And could you make a clip of how they're using the graphs with regard to the effect of ivermectin?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think we should do that.
You mentioned it will be in the description as well.
Oh, yes. Well, the PowerPoint that I was showing will be linked to in the description as well, at least of the main one. 3 cheers for the bees. Woot, woot, woot.
All right.
Thanks so much for answering my question at the top with regard to FLCCC evidence. I was mainly hoping to have a source to argue and defend for the ivermectin, but I understand your position. I'm a big fan. Love your work. And how about let's end on, oh God, there's so many. There's so many. If you had recovered from COVID-19 last April isn't a word, is it?
No.
I think it's getting late. If you had recovered from COVID-19 last April, would you prophylactically dose with ivermectin or trust your natural immunity, especially if someone close tested positive? It's a really good question, and that actually raises, I have been asked privately a couple of times recently, like, wait a minute, I'm confused. I recently went back and watched your very first episode in which you, Heather, described something that you and Zack had in February of 2020 that you really thought might be COVID. And we haven't returned to it, so let me just say briefly that as much as what both Zack and I experienced in February of 2020 seemed a perfect match for what was then being described as COVID and was totally unlike anything that either of us had ever experienced before, like waking up feeling asphyxiated, unable to stand up, like I actually fell down, and just hacking cough that would not stop. The most reliable, it seems, symptom of COVID that wasn't being talked about then yet, which is loss of taste and smell, was not a feature for either of us. And all of us got tested relatively early, but we're not sure about the reliability of those tests. But we all came back negative, and Bret and I have since been tested as well, and it just keeps coming back negative for prior infection. So I think it's not likely at this point
I think
that Zack and I had it, although it seemed at the time like, oh, actually that's a perfect fit.
Wait, before you go there, I just want to say the evidence is particularly strong because
against us
having had it, because the evidence that you had the same thing as each other is very good.
Yes.
Right. So the point is, any individual could have COVID and not lose their sense of smell, but the chances are much lower that you'd have two people who had COVID and neither of them lose their sense of smell. The chances of somebody not showing up as positive on a "have you ever had COVID" test is high enough, but the chance that two people wouldn't show up as positive or having been positive is much lower.
And then that one person would show up as never having had it on, I think it was like three different tests. Yeah.
Right. So combined, I think you had something bad, something flu-like, and as bad as you've had, but it wasn't COVID. It was also very early. I can't remember the dates of your.
Yeah, but I had just been in LA, so the timing actually
the timing
worked.
was possible.
Like I picked something up like in the rental car in the plane in LA.
The timing was possible, but the point is the timing does not point to it wasn't.
I think the timing actually worked.
We can debate that.
Yeah, but I agree. I don't think.
But anyway, I think the question that you've asked, let's put that part aside.
Yeah. If someone, and presumably this person is asking on behalf of someone that they actually know or are, right? If you had recovered from COVID-19 last April, would you prophylactically dose with ivermectin or trust your natural immunity, especially if someone close tested positive? So let's take that's two different questions.
So hold on. They have asked the question as, what would we do? And that is the way we are going to answer it, right? This is not advice for you. This is what we would do in that hypothetical circumstance. I've got my answer. You got yours?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. I'll start. My answer is I would not prophylactically dose, but I would have it on hand, and the very first sign of symptoms, I wouldn't hesitate. As far as if somebody tested positive who was close to you, like somebody in your house, I might consider then taking it. The cost of ivermectin is low. The risk and the burden on the system is low. But if you've had COVID, you're pretty well immune, right?
So this is going to be shocking to you, but that's exactly the answer that I had arrived at.
Whoa.
I don't think this is a difference. I think just adding one level of precision here, which is that last April is getting to the outside of that window that maybe you're losing your immunity at that point.
Yeah.
So it would be, great to get an antibody test, for instance, to see if you actually
you're tighter.
You're tighter. And I would say, depending on if someone close tested positive means, if it's someone you're sharing a home with and it's 14 months ago that you tested positive, I think that I would prophylactically dose with ivermectin for the time period, for a month or so. But that otherwise, I think I wouldn't, because your natural immunity should do it.
Yeah.
But I would definitely have it on hand.
All right. And I'm going to add one nuance here too.
And then I'm going to add another one. I don't know what it is yet.
We'll find out. This is exciting. No, I would say if you were in a city in which a new variant was spreading, then the sense that you are immune from a previous encounter with COVID is much less secure. And then I would just dose with ivermectin.
Yeah, good. I don't have anything to add.
All right.
Which I think
this is it?
I think we're done.
All right.
I think we're done. So we probably won't come back before next Saturday because it's the last week of school for one of our boys, and you've got another podcast. I don't think you're going to be doing it live stream, but maybe actually another person in the studio, right? We got another person coming here this week for a cool podcast. So join us at our Patreons. Subscribe and like to both this channel and the Clips channel. Check out our book website and consider doing an early purchase on that. That would be awesome. What else? I can't think of any of the other logistics things. So I will say, love the ones with whom you live and eat good food and get outside.
And if you encounter somebody playing the bubble game, steal their shoes.